For those that don't know me, my name is Aaron Kessler. I'm Associate Director of Learning Sciences and Teaching as part of Open Learning. It's my pleasure and honor to welcome you to the Festival of Learning. It's a real treat for me to introduce Daniel E. Hastings, the Interim Vice Chancellor, and Cecil and Ida Green, Education Professor of Aeronautics and Astronautics, to welcome us, share some opening thoughts before we get into our panels today. Professor Hastings.
So I like that introduction, brief and to the point. So welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this 8th Annual Festival of Learning. As was said, I'm Daniel Hastings, Interim Vice Chancellor for Undergraduate and Graduate Education. So I'm pleased to be co-hosting this event between the OVC and with our colleagues in Open Learning. Before we start, 2 logistic notes. Today's session is being recorded. So if you don't wish to be part of the recording, the seats at the back, right at the back there, will not be on the camera. Otherwise, they'll see the back of your head, right? We also ask that you sign in on the form that's coming around. This is very helpful to stay in touch and continue the conversation. So I'll do my best in my brief remarks not to say anything too outrageous and instead set up the incoming Vice Chancellor, who I really hope will be named next week for success. First and foremost, it's 2025. We made it. Congratulations. In the last few years, we've faced many challenges here at MIT, both inside and outside the classroom. There are global and local challenges to humankind and the planet that call upon us to embrace in this new way what it means for Mens et Manus for the future. There's much to be proud of at MIT, and we are hugely fortunate to have our remarkable students across the board. It makes it all the more important that we do well by them as much as we can. Thinking of the theme for today, what Mens et Manus looks like in the future of teaching and learning at MIT, here's some statistics which show the kind of tradition and place we are. 60% of our undergraduates are doing UROPs every year. 93% of seniors complete at least 1 UROP before they graduate. 50+% of graduating seniors travel abroad with Misty. Our graduate students, more than half of them, are making impacts beyond higher ed in key industries and organizations. And for all students, we see an increase in interest in social entrepreneurship. Our faculty and instructors genuinely care about teaching. That's not always true across all of the Ivy Plus group of which we're part, but I can say it here, we genuinely care about teaching. Moreover, we're once again endeavoring to renew our current undergraduate academic program and consider improvements in all aspects of the GIRs with a focus on both curriculum and pedagogy. So we have great students. The faculty are amazing. We win lots of awards. We must be doing everything right, so why change? Well, we owe it to ourselves and to others to be bold. After all, if you're at the top, the only place you can go is down, right? So, so it's in our DNA to try new things at MIT, and right now you can actually help with the process. Today, you're going to hear faculty and instructor panelists share their perspectives on Mens et Manus for the future, what it means to leverage technology, rethink current approaches, and deeply engage our students. You'll hear examples of what it means to move forward together, collaborating to transform MIT subjects. We implore you to take these stories of the positives and the challenges in teaching and learning and working together to be an inspiration for each other as we continually iterate. Because we're MIT, and because the world has changed, is changing, we owe it to our students to reflect these realities in our academic experiences. So I'd ask you to keep in mind one of the goals of the Task Force Undergraduate Academic Program, which is looking at our undergraduate academic program, and this is a quote. We ultimately aim for an undergraduate academic program that celebrates the qualities that make MIT, well, MIT. An academic program that inspires our students, enables our graduates to dream big, innovate, and contribute to their profession and society. So let's take that seriously. Find new ways to ensure it happens inside the classroom, outside the classroom. Moreover, since we are a leadership institution, we know that what we do at MIT can influence STEM education broadly, and often all of higher education. Think of what open learning has done. Think of what OCW did. Think of Europs, think of D-Lab and more. Those things have been copied in institutions across the country. Finally, as Chancellor Melissa Nobles has charged us, we're here to educate the whole student, the emphasis being on the whole. What they learn here, they will take with them as leaders, as educators, as those who shape our world. So enjoy this time. Be creative, think boldly, challenge yourselves. So I want to end my comments by thanking Cheryl Barnes, Aaron Kessler, Jovi Nazarino, who worked to actually put together this event today. So thank you. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Janet. I'm supposed to do a drum roll. Drum roll. Janet, for the first panel.
Thank you, Dan, and thank you, Open Learning, for organizing this event. It's always a wonderful event, and it's great to see so many people that want to think about and talk about teaching. Before I introduce the panelists, I just want to do a quick kind of tell you what's going to happen. I'll introduce the panelists, and then what'll happen is each panelist will have 4 minutes to respond to their question, their primary question, and then we'll have the other panelists can chime in as needed. We ask that you hold your questions for the panelists until the very end. We're going to save time at the end. That's why we're keeping strict time, so that there'll be plenty of time for questions at the end, and there'll be microphones, and you can ask your questions at that point. Just one thing before I introduce the panelists is we know there's just like an insane amount of stuff going on in the world, in the country, at MIT, and people are thinking about that and worried about it, talking about it, whatever. And so it's on our minds, and I'm sure that the panelists will make connections between Men's at Manus, what it is at MIT, what Men's at Manus means at MIT, and what does it mean in the larger context. And that's great, but they still only have 4 minutes for it. So I just want to make sure everybody knows that. So without further ado, please, I'll just introduce them. This is currently order of alphabetical order. Chris Capozzola, the Elting E. Morison Professor of History and Senior Associate Dean for Open Learning. Chris Capozzola, come on up. Yeah. Adam Martin. Adam is a professor of biology and the co-chair of the task force on the undergraduate academic program, affectionately known as TFWAP. Adam. Amitava Babi Mitra, founding executive director for the new engineering education transformation, NEET, in the School of Engineering. Sorry, Babi. And last but certainly not least, Susan Silby, the Leon and Ann Goldberg Professor of Humanities, Sociology and Anthropology, and Professor of Behavioral and Policy Sciences at the Sloan School of Management. Thank you. Fabulous. So now the first question is Susan's. And we're going to ask, your question, as you know, is there a slide with that or no? Yeah, right there. What do you see as the strengths and or challenges in what Men's at Manus looks like in practice today, and how can the connection between mind and hand be improved in support of the whole student?
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. And the principal strength of the MIT pedagogical philosophy is the emphasis on project engagement, hands-on learning. Like many engineering schools, hands-on problem solving and project work is not unusual, but rather standard. Yet, until recently, the MIT curriculum was regarded as the gold standard of engineering education because the degree in engineering was based not solely on engineering, but on the deep foundation of fundamental science, the GIRs, the General Institute requirements, 2 semesters of physics, 2 semesters of advanced calculus, semester of chemistry, 2 additional science classes, and a 12-hour laboratory experience. Beginning in the 1980s, a semester of biology was added. Alongside these science requirements, the general degree required students to take 8 courses in humanities, arts, and social sciences distributed across cognitive and subject matter variation for many decades. It was, however, in 2008 reduced to 1 humanities, 1 art, 1 social science, with any other 5 courses the students selected, requiring only that at least 3 have subject matter connections. The last time I looked, and it has been a while, a majority of the students were completing their HAS requirements, not by taking history, literature, philosophy, anthropology, political science, but by taking economics and foreign languages, subjects that do not include significant reading, textual interpretation, ambiguity, or involvement with uncertain questions, which brings me to the challenge of MIT's current enactment of Mens and Manus. The current MIT undergraduate experience is distorted by the dominance of computer science as the alpha and omega of all knowledge, learning, and wisdom. When this began 20 years or more ago, with the shift away from the variety of kinds of engineering and science, analysts warned it was a bubble and would at some point burst with significant negative effects. Although the digital revolution certainly needed well-trained practitioners to reconstitute MIT so thoroughly through computer science would be like many socioeconomic bubbles, characterized by rapid escalation in volume and apparent value, but not deep value, followed by contraction and decrease. We are already seeing this as AI is quickly replacing a great deal of what had been the work of computer science trained students. And we have certainly seen significant harms from the internet, social media, AI, basically produced without or in direct opposition to normative foundations of ordinary, everyday life, social, moral decency. Perhaps the more significant challenge to MIT's current enactment of Mens and Manus is exactly this: a general lack of understanding or engagement with what constitutes the grounds and patterns of well-functioning societies. I emphasize well-functioning. You can ask me later what that means. In short, our students have minimal understanding of how the action of any individual becomes part of something larger, durable, consequential, through invisible but powerful mechanisms of aggregation. Our curriculum encourages students to see each person as a unique actor, pursuing individual wants and desires, a self-interested utility maximizer, requiring only a good optimizing algorithm with which to organize her life. Too many students graduate, and our surveys show this, without sufficient apprehension and understanding of the collective conditions that shape, mold, and limit human action, without understanding what social, moral responsibility consists of. They miss the forest for the trees. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much for outlining certainly the challenges and the weaknesses. We appreciate that. I know a few of the other panelists might have something to say about this. Chris?
Well, I will just briefly heartily agree with Susan, and sort of as someone who comes both from SHAS at MIT, but also thinking very deeply about how MIT learning it moves out into the world. And I'll say more about that later in this session. But as also someone who has been here at MIT for now about 20, 25 years, and seeing what has changed and what has endured. And some of the big, broader shifts in the world that have to do with transformations in technology and technology industries that recruit and largely employ our students in ever-increasing percentages. And at the same time, additional crises, both political and I would add here, ecological and climate crises that are drawing inadequate attention from our students, and that we are inadequately teaching our students too. I'm thinking here particularly of the undergraduate curriculum, but I think in the graduate level it might be somewhat different. And I think that there's 2 points I would put on the table. One is our students across undergraduate and graduate levels have the best of intentions, but they move in systems of incentives. And I think that as we do things like the task force for the undergraduate academic program, we need to look not only at sort of written requirements, which are the most obvious form of incentives, but the kind of unwritten incentives and structures, whether it's of student prestige, of student culture, et cetera, that are maybe harder to reach by that. And so that's the first. And then the second is, of course, we can't, it's a mistake to blame technology for the problems where responsibility lies with the human, right? And so teaching and thinking at that interface between technology and society is really crucial for sort of making technologists feel responsible for the things that they create and the things that they use.
Great, thank you. I know Adam is going to touch maybe a little bit on how things might change, so I think maybe we'll just move into your principal question, if that's okay?
Okay.
Great. So your question, Adam, is what changes or improvements to MIT education, whether in terms of subjects, courses, or whole programs, do you see as important for the future, and why? And obviously, there's a nice follow-up to Susan's response.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think, I guess, for me, my opinion is, we should be looking for kind of opportunities as much as possible to sort of incorporate kind of hands-on sort of like learning sort of in our curriculum. I'm as co-chair of the TFWOP, I'm also super excited to hear people's sort of ideas as to how we could do more of that. This is certainly sort of something on our list of learning goals. But I wanted to also talk about how I guess I've seen sort of in my sort of own space how this can be incorporated. And I want to use a lab example and also a class example if I have time. So for the lab example, I've been affiliated with a IAP lab course for the past several years that's run by a senior lecturer in our department, Mandana Sasamfar. And I think she really unlocks the students, particularly first years, imaginations in the way that she has designed this particular course. So the course is kind of premised on sort of a story that a child has fallen in the Charles River and has an infection in their leg caused by an antibiotic-resistant bacteria. And the students in the course, their task is to save this individual who's fictional. But sometimes I wonder if Mandana has forgotten this is fictional because she is really sort of driving the class and rooting for them to, because it's antibiotic resistance, we're looking for phage that will kill this bacteria. She goes down to the Charles River, collects water. We have the students kind of isolating phage from this water and from other sources that are more well-defined. And the students are in an environment where they can fail. They have to try over and over again to do some of the experiments to characterize the bacteria that this fictional girl has been infected with, to characterize the phage that they're trying to see that will interact or kill this bacteria. And so it really sort of shows the students not only basic techniques, but what it's like to kind of be in a team and kind of like in a discovery situation. Great, how's my time? 1 minute, okay. I also wanted to mention some work that I did when I was teaching cell biology. This is work I actually did with Mary Ellen Wiltrout, who is here with us. And we tried in our cell biology class to kind of unlock the, I guess, not only the sort of passion for, but just even knowledge of how discovery science works by creating videos called NEET Experiments in Cell Biology, where we didn't have a lab affiliated with our lecture course, but it was basically kind of outlining sort of like famous experiments in cell biology to kind of give the students a sense of the logic and to how science is done. And I feel like these two examples kind of illustrate, I guess, what I think I would love to see more of and more resources devoted to kind of promoting in our sort of undergraduate curriculum.
Great. Thank you very much. When you were speaking, I just was, oh, sure, we can clap. I was struck by this mind and hand, and whether those are serial things, like we do the mind and then we do the hand, or whether they really have to be like connected, so it's kind of in parallel or simultaneous to make meaning and to have maximum benefit. And then what does it mean? What is the work of the mind and what is the work of the hand? I think the mind is a little bit easier to kind of maybe think about, but the hand, what constitutes hands-on learning? And so I think that's a nice possible question to grapple with. As a follow-up, I don't know if Babi or Susan have some comments about what Adam said.
Well, I will say I absolutely agree with you that hand and mind have to go together. And I will just say it right out. When the mind part, that is not cell biology, but is about the politics of vaccines or the distribution of medical care or similar, it cannot be appropriated by only the technologists. And that's the problem we have at MIT. There is a genuine effort to incorporate the social, economic, historical in everything, but it has been appropriated by people who do not have the expertise.
Jan, if I may. So I couldn't agree more. Can you hear me in the back? Excellent. Very mortifying when, anyway. I couldn't agree more with what Adam said, and I think without that, we're in trouble. So I just want to add one thing to mind and hand and mind, which is heart. Mm-hmm. Because I think as the last 5-10 years, without heart, we really can't take things forward. So I just wanted to add that to the men's and Manus.
No?
Yeah. One more thing, 30 seconds.
Okay. Well, I'll give an example of how we are trying to incorporate the heart and mind. In the CERC program, social and ethical responsibility of computing, we have made up pieces of curriculum that we take to different courses. Last year, I was asked to produce one with a team of graduate students, and we produced an analysis of the consequences of the possible consequences of autonomous vehicles. We were asked to teach this in a graduate course, was a very technical class on the machinery in the certification. And these 30 students had never heard or knew anything about the history of the regulation of dangerous products. We gave a survey out before we began. They knew nothing. They never imagined any negative consequences. These are the people making the technology. By the end of an hour and a half of them have changed their mind. I never had such successful teaching in 40 minutes.
Great, thank you. Yeah, Adam.
Can I ask Susan a question?
Sure.
So I couldn't agree more that like the kind of societal implications of science and technology should be sort of like learned sort of along with the technical aspect. What do you think is limiting us from collaborating more?
The budget of MIT, the way we allocate the funds and positions. Just look at the growth of MIT in terms of teaching staff, graduate students, and there is something deep. I don't know where it is yet, but I'm looking for it, as to how decisions about where the resources go. And that's what has made us. Mm-hmm. There are many faculty at MIT believe that getting more students in their classroom will enhance their position, their department's position, and I've seen this on committee after committee after committee, when we try to introduce new courses and people say, oh, no, that would bring non-majors into my class. And they don't want non-majors. It's called off-diagonal teaching. It took me 3 years to learn what that means.
Yeah.
Don't want to teach somebody else's student. That's what it means. That's the problem. It's deep, unnoticed, but you hear it on committees every once in a while. So where did they get that idea? I've shut everybody up.
Well, we're all thinking. There must be an answer, right?
Make us think.
Great. And so next up, we have Babi, Mitra. Not Bobby Klein. I don't know who that is, actually.
I go by either.
I have no idea. Anyway, just came out of my mouth. So, Babi, your question is, what examples do you have of what it means to deeply engage MIT students, whether via tools or educational approaches?
Thanks, Janet. Before I go into my 4 minutes, how many in this room have heard about NEET before they got this flyer? Wow. In the few 7 or 8 years that NEET has been around, I can tell you a few years ago, one person would put up their hand or maybe none. So anyway, so that means I don't need to talk too much about it. Before I jump into examples, I think whether it's tackling climate change, creating sustainable infrastructure, creating cutting-edge technologies in life sciences or robotics, we need our engineers, and I'm saying engineers in a broad sense, not just include social scientists, include scientists. We need them to work in teams cutting across disciplines to create solutions. Right? In the current academic setup around the world, there are very limited opportunities for undergraduates to collaborate in teams with majors from other departments and minors working towards the common purpose. So NEET came into being. It was chartered by the Dean of Engineering in 2016-17. There were 2 major goals. One was to reimagine MIT undergraduate engineering education to help prepare them better for tackling critical problems in the world. And the other one was to contribute to the global knowledge and engineering education. So what is NEET? So undergraduates who elect to pursue a NEET program join as sophomores, and they spend their sophomore through senior years in one of 4 pathways: autonomy and robotics, autonomous machines, climate sustainability systems, self-evident title, digital cities, and living machines, which is applied bioengineering and biotechnology. They pursue the major of their choice, and they get a NEET certificate in one of these 4 in the usual 3 years, and they work collaboratively, they work on projects, they work in teams. So in a sense, NEET is a 3-year project-centric experiential learning curriculum that is team-based. I do want to clarify one thing, because this question gets asked a lot. It is not a major, it's not a degree, it's not a minor, it's an experience. It's a 3-year experience, right? So where are we now? Students are voting with their feet. We started with about 40, 8+ years ago, and there are 248 as of last year, juniors, sophomores, and seniors. They are pursuing 11 majors, 21 majors from 11 departments across almost all the schools. There are 59% of women. MIT is about 48%. 35% are underrepresented groups. MIT 32%. So it's an academically, demographically diverse community with a lot of energy. I do want to mention this. There's student testimonials and survey responses, which are great. So Katie Spivakowski, who's a junior majoring in 20 and 6-4, before he joined MIT, said that NEET was a deciding factor in her joining MIT, which is like, okay, wow. Now that she's halfway through a junior year, she feels that NEET has contributed very strongly to her development as a scientist. So people are gaining from it. So we've now completed the pilot phase. We've moved into the next phase, which is 3 to 5 years sustainability moving forward. I did want to mention, since Adam's here, that there are many learning goals and process goals that NEET has that map onto many of the goals that the report TFOAP has outlined. It's a 3-year departmental community of shared interests. They're trained to define and solve problems through a common approach. They define their own research question, engineering problem, and get to know how to learn in different settings. And they meet and interact with both the faculty lead for the thread and the instructor over 3 years. So the instructors have de facto become mentors over the 3-year period. So jumping into examples. So one of the things we keep hearing from NEET is that they find NEET as a structured way to explore and follow up on what they think is their passion or what they think they want to find out, right? And that gives them an opportunity. If it doesn't work out, they move on to something else without much penalty. So I'll share 3 examples. One is sophomores. So this is the Climate and Sustainability System thread. It's a 6-unit class, 3001, 2203, Introduction to Prototyping and Design. And at this moment, there are students from 2A, 2, 3. I'm reading this out. I don't want to make a mistake. 10B, 10-inch, 22-inch, a course 2 senior, 2 first years, and 2 Harvard students graduate students from Harvard. I don't know how they showed up, but they're there. So they're designing, building, and installing a solar power charging station on the MIT campus in the MIT open space, and that's coming up in April. And they're learning that it's much more than technical content. In the process, they're interacting with campus planning, Kendall MIT Open Space, EHS, Greg Raposa's group, Engineering Energy Management, MIT Police, Cambridge Fire, MIT Insurance, and so on. It's an eye-opener for them, right? Another example is from juniors. This is a research-intensive class in living machines, a 6-unit class. And what they do there is it's structured. So one of the things that they do there is that they are pursuing the Europs in different areas like synthetic biology, computational biology, microfluidic devices, and so on. They come together in 2054 to present their Europs, learn from each other, and learn about techniques. Students from 2010, 64, 57, 67, 63. And finally, my last example, which is seniors. So the project class in autonomous machines, 1684, advanced autonomous robotic systems. Last year, they created something called Trash robot with autonomous snatching hand, course 16, 2, and 6. And they made an autonomous road cleanup robot that picks up red cans, Coke cans. It's a rover. It uses an onboard camera to identify the cans, picks them up, drops them somewhere. The course 2 worked on robot assembly. The course 16 worked on the electronic part. Course 6, of course, worked on software and simulation. And they came together, integrate to create this product.
OK, it's time. And I'm sure a lot of folks, when you were speaking and we're talking about these sort of diverse teams, it seems like that's a door for this, a really in-depth collaboration with perspectives from humanities, arts, social sciences, as well as technology. How might that be? How might you expand this experience to make sure that those interactions are actually meaningful and well integrated rather? And I know you said they'd speak with campus planning and whatever, but how, in terms of the actual kind of intellectual content and these sort of questions?
So let me respond quickly to that. So NEET has had the 7-8 years experience of working across departments and schools, right? We've learned, we've made mistakes, we've moved on, we've learned. It's an opt-in, opt-out program. So it's student-driven. If we don't have students, there's no NEET. So we're constantly trying to understand what's of value to them, what can they bring in. I think to your question, we are not looking to do that in NEET. The departments are doing that, and they do it much better than NEET can ever do it. What we are really looking to do in NEET is to build a community where students from different majors come together. It doesn't happen anywhere in the world. It seems so evident. Work together, understand how to talk to each other. So if I'm a course 2, what do I ask you if you're a course 6? If you're a course 6, what do I ask the course 5, 7, who's in that program? And take that forward. We are hoping that some of that comes in. Diversity was not a goal for this program. It's created a lot of energy. There are clearly people coming in who want to do this. But we are not, from a pedagogic perspective, we are not addressing that issue except creating an environment where they learn and they do things.
OK. Chris?
So I think that things like NEET are things that MIT does exceptionally well. And what they would then also reveal is that as we're thinking about teaching the whole student, that experience is on a spectrum from formal classroom experiences to things that are, at the far end of the spectrum, fundamentally extracurricular, right? That are sort of, literally play and enjoyment that, sort of help people, get up the next morning and do more problem sets, right? And in between, that spectrum is, in fact, a continuum, right, of things that are deeply curricular, that emerge from the curriculum, like NEET, but that may, not be sort of always formal credit-bearing undertakings. And then things that in this special area where I think MIT particularly excels, which is the paracurricular, right, which is a recent term that I now use all the time because I think it captures what MIT does really well. And Dan talked about this in his opening statement, Europe, right, MISTI. MIT has these amazing opportunities for students interested in entrepreneurship, solar car competition, robots, pokerbots, D-Lab, the Gordon Engineering Leadership Program, right? The list could go on enormously, right? Where students put in enormous amounts of time and effort for things that shape them, that speak to their passion and this deep engagement. I think that, what deep engagement means in practice is the answer to the question, so what, right? And I think in a particular classroom, that idea of touching, because, Janet, you were sort of talking about, like, literally hands, right? And sometimes, so what helps you understand, biology or chemistry because you can physically feel things happening in the world, right, or mechanics, right? But sometimes I think it's better to think of the Manus part as how a student answers the so what question at the end of the day.
So let me quickly add an example. I think you can't be a real engineer if you don't understand the context, right? And context is everything which is not engineering. For the third year in a row, there are a group of students in climate sustainability who've just come back from Ulaanbaatar. They're working on a project to decarbonize Ulaanbaatar. Thanks to MCSC and MISTI for funding part of it. So they thought they had an answer. They thought they had a solution how to do that within the, the homes of people living there. They went there and they were completely zapped. It was minus 40 Fahrenheit, which is the same as minus 40 centigrade. They came back and they said, we had no clue what we were trying to do. We thought we knew what the answer was, but once we went there and saw what was on the ground, understood the context, the social modes, the social processes, we had no clue.
Right, and I think it's a really interesting, right? It's that we had no clue, and it's kind of our job to put them in situations where they acknowledge that they have no clue. So we say they, if there's students here, we're sorry. That students have no clue. Yeah, Susan.
So this issue of students going out into the world with their devices and making them and having no clue is unfortunately not new. The students come to the anthropology department from all over the institute, speaking to one or another of us to say, I'm going to Zanzibar to do something. Could you tell me what it's like there? I'm going tomorrow. And when we give them some ethnography, some history about the culture, they said, that's a lot of reading. So part of the problem is that that the context is everything that is not engineering. But that's not well accepted at MIT. And I'll give you a story, if I might. On one of these educational committees, where we were trying to develop new integrative courses across the institute, where I learned this phrase, off-diagonal teaching, I said to the chairman of the committee, I don't quite understand what that is. I have lots of students in my class who are not anthropologists, in fact, all of them. And he says, oh, Susan, you don't understand. Anthropology is a service department to us. And I said to him, but I'm sitting next to Waddy Taylor in physics. Most of the students in his class are not physicists. And one of your colleagues said in this 20-person committee, oh, Susan, you really don't understand. The School of Science is a service school.
Mic drop.
So if I could add another example.
Well, I want to make sure. I want to make sure that Chris has ample time. and that you all have ample time for questions.
Sure.
So, Chris, your question is, what do you think it'll take to transform Men's at Manus for the future? Just a light.
I was going to say, I got the easy question, apparently. So thanks for this and for the ones before this. I wanted to tackle this one by just talking about three things, and I will be brief. Basically, technology, our campus, and the republic in which we do our work. So first, in terms of technology, I think that is a key to this. And here I'm wearing my hat as our Senior Associate Dean for Open Learning, and many of the folks in the room are devoted to kind of using technology to improve teaching and learning at MIT and around the world. And I think that MIT has a special opportunity in the next 25 years to lead and learn as we lead around the critical adoption of new technologies, right? We have experienced that several times already in the last 25 years, but particularly in the last 2 or 3 as generative AI has moved into everyday use in classrooms across the Institute. And we need to sort of be the place that the world turns for informed guidance about how these technologies can transform teaching. That's about better learning outcomes in the classroom. It's also about better use of technologies in society, right? And making sure that technologies make education more equitable for students on our campus, but also for campuses around the United States and around the world. This is a particularly crucial task for MIT at this moment, at a time when higher education is under scrutiny in the United States, when the value of an $80,000 college degree is under question, when institutions with substantial, private institutions with substantial endowments are accused of being insufficiently responsive to the American public. At the same time, we need to leverage technology to share with the world all the things that make a 4-year residential university experience so magical, right? All those things I talked about, right? The entrepreneurship club, the solar power car club, et cetera, right? And how do we, instead of creating, sort of off-ramps for higher education in skills-based hiring, credential-based learning, and the kinds of things that are emerging in the conversation right now, how do we sort of ensure that all the things that we find precious about an MIT education are not, in fact, precious commodities, but common ones? So that's the first one. Second I think one of the ways to do that is to explode the concept of the campus. And then I think that the campus is an artifact of the 20th century. The semester is an artifact of the 19th century, an era when people had to harvest things, which we do still have to harvest things, but most of us don't, right? Need to kind of end school so we can, use a thresher. And so we need to just explode what it means to be a learner, right? And I'm very excited about Learning Goal 9 of TFWAP around lifelong learning, which invites MIT to think about what it means for someone to be an MIT student for their entire life. And I, in fact, would go even further. I think that one of the flip sides of that is that also exploding the terms of admissions. That we always, at MIT, I think too many people boast about the idea that our 4% admissions rate is something to be proud of. I think that's a 96% failure rate, right? And that, in fact, if we sort of could imagine a scenario in which we invited the entire world to participate in MIT, right? And some of those people may move on to spend 4 years as residential students here and may come back over the course of their life for a week here, a week there, leverage the kind of the flexibility of technology to rethink what it means to be a student and what it means to be on campus. I think makes all of that possible for Men's at Manus to be meaningful, not just for the 1,100 students that we admit every year, but for tens of thousands at a time. And then third is sort of the so what question, which for me to answer that today is about Men's at Manus for democracy, right? And the hands-on work of democratic practice that is always crucial, but I think has become particularly crucial in the last 9 days. And that I think is important to equip students on the men's side with the kinds of civic knowledge that they need to go out into the world, but also the Manus, right? To be able to do the everyday work of kind of getting your hands dirty and building democratic institutions, including democratizing institutions like MIT and giving people at MIT more voice, students, staff, others who are often sort of closed out of conversations about leadership at MIT, more of a democratic voice so that we can be a model for the university that we want to be in 25 years. So I'll stop there.
Great. I'm sure the other panelists would like to chime in. Anything to add?
Sure, I'm always ready to chime in.
Are you going to say the same thing you were going to say before?
No. I don't know what I was going to say before.
Okay.
By the way, my family has banned the word NEET from our dinner table, so we've heard enough about it. So if I keep talking about it, excuse me. I just wanted to add to Chris's response to that question and what he said. Slightly different note. I think where we don't do as well is in implementing things. Mm-hmm. And that's true, I think, of academia in general. Implementing things like this, projects, make it happen. We don't think it through. We don't sort of look to the future. We don't look at the consequences. You put 3 people together and say, go do it, right? So to me, anything we do in the future, it's critical that we put together a team. There's so many professionals in this room and outside, and they actually work on making it happen, as opposed to hoping it'll happen.
Yeah, it seems like there's some analogies. I think when I first came here in the 2000s, people were talking about wicked problems or messy problems, but they almost always, not always, but they often would revert to sort of just tough technological problems. And I think that we all know that the problems that are the most wicked are the ones they're messy. They're human problems. They're societal problems. That sure have something to do with technology, but they're very messy. And so maybe a thought like that, like let's solve real problems, let's solve messy problems, and to do that, you need a lot of different perspectives and skills and vantage points, and that's hands-on work in the broader sense of it. Maybe you're not, touching something necessarily, but you're doing hands-on active work. So thank you for that. Susan,
Well,
I knew you wanted to say something.
Well, that's okay. I had a quote in my notes, which I collected last week in Copenhagen from the Danish philosopher and theologian Søren Kierkegaard. It was actually interesting because they were left on your bed every night, another quote in the hotel room. So it says, life can only be understood backwards, but it must be lived forwards. Moreover, life is not a problem that needs to be solved, but a reality that must be experienced. You have to stop a little and think before you act.
Definitely. Any other comments before we open it up for questions? Let's thank the panelists again. Really wonderful.
I would just say briefly, I think on that spectrum of learning, right, there's an important space at MIT for all of the first-year learning communities, right? Terrascope, Concourse, ESG, all media arts and sciences, all those sorts of things. And I think that they're real models for exactly that kind of answering the so what question, which each student is going to ask and answer in a different way. I'll take the first crack at it, and then maybe I'll turn it to Adam. And I meant to ask Adam whether the little kid, did she make it okay? Adam, did she get better?
They will find, yes, they get beautiful electron micrographs of phage that destroy that bacteria.
Okay, good, okay, yeah. Shoot. All right. I think the easiest answer to this question is to give up, 5 minutes of content delivery for 5 minutes of reflection, right? And whether that's empowering the students to reflect on the so what, maybe it's giving voice. If we're going to explode the curriculum a little bit, bring in an alum for 15 minutes of a lecture to talk, who's working with this stuff in an applied way, to come back and reflect with students. We are most comfortable as content delivery devices, but we are most effective when we give up just that little bit of room. That's my short answer.
Thank you. Susan, did you want to say something? No. Adam.
Yeah, I'll say a little bit about that. As a part of a service school and someone who teaches a course, I teach the bio-GIR that 99% of the students are non-majors, right? Like the focus of the class is on so what. So like I think, some ways we really try to have real sort of world examples. The pandemic was unfortunate, but made my job easier. So like kind of like connecting to like what's happening in their lives. I think I want to connect back to what Susan was talking about earlier, kind of like connecting to society and even ethical kind of decisions.
I can share an example. So there was this course called Answer Engineering that Mike Short, course 22, who leads the climate and sustainable system thread, worked with faculty from Susan's department. And the Ulaanbaatar project is part of that, right? So the anthro part is the context, and the engineering part is how do you make it work. So I keep getting back to examples because I think we have enough tools and techniques on campus. I think it's really how do you put them together and make it happen and learn from that.
Do you want to say something?
Okay, now Susan wants to say something.
So one of the problems we have at MIT and in the contemporary world for the last 40, close to 50 years, is a belief that you best understand any phenomena by reducing it to individual micro components. And that what links in a network or in some other form, how they aggregate to make durable patterns of action is not well understood. Now, in political discourse these days, that notion that the individual is a unique actor that does not exist in connection to everybody else goes by the name neoliberal. And this has been the economic and political ideology that has dominated the Western and now the global world for about 50 years. And our students at MIT are perfect embodiments of this. They are many of them who are what we also call libertarians. They believe that the individual is the beginning and end. And the context, it's a bit of a limitation. But I don't have to worry about it because I'm so uniquely endowed and powerful. And so the problem is that where do they learn to think this way? They are endowed with enormous capacity. And they will shape the world. And that's what they go out and want to do. But it's by themselves. They learned in the teams.
Absolutely.
That the team is sometimes a burden.
Yeah. Yeah.
Chris?
Can I?
Oh, no, go ahead. We sold it for a for-profit company.
I don't know if you know, but Kurt is an exceptional drummer in a jazz band. And I've heard him, yeah. More creative than anything we do. So to your question, I think, so here's my take. I think we have enough happening on campus that we can make happen. I'm not saying we shouldn't interact with institutions outside, but I think, I keep going back to implementation. When we started NEET, everyone told us the departments are silos. They won't do nothing. And our response was, yes, they have to be silos. They're advancing knowledge, creating new knowledge, teaching bright students. They're not in the business of creating cross-departmental communities. I remember Ed Crowley and I went to meet with Susan, I don't know if she remembers, early on, and she had two questions. Why are you coming to me? You're from engineering. And what can I tell you? And I don't have to respond to that. So I'm just sort of very focused saying we have enough here. We can explore the world with what we have here. That doesn't mean we go out, but let's first do that and make it happen, like OpenCourseWare. I
think OpenCourseWare is one of the best things that MIT has ever done, and kudos to you, too.
Thank you, team.
And when MITx and edX were created in the spring of 2012, we were convinced by the administration who put it forward that we were giving MIT's education to the world. And then we sold it for $800,000 to a for-profit company. And we have struggled ever since to keep up without a sufficient budget. And it's under pressure. It's his job to fix it.
It is.
I love you, Chris.
Million, by the way. Yes.
Yeah.
So, I have to say briefly in response to Kurt, maybe about where this sits specifically at MIT, I think I would use two words. That I think really inviting the world into MIT in the spirit of exploding our campus would do two things, right? It would make, it would be designed to make us uncomfortable, right? And I think there are many ways in which the machine of MIT is actually, is a comfort-producing machine. Right? It produces sort of reliable outputs, right? Who end up, more often than not at technology companies and consulting companies and PhD programs. Right? So it's designed to make us uncomfortable. And then second, would also maybe teach us humility, right? And I think the MIT curriculum is not good at all at teaching humility. And I think this is what Susan pointed out, right? It empowers students with confidence. That confidence can sometimes be overconfidence or arrogance, right? But to teach kind of intellectual humility and realize that I don't know everything, right, is exactly what opening the campus to very new and different voices could empower.
So there are some people who think that technology can help us with this, Emily. I, as you know, am somewhat skeptical, ultimately. But we have seen, for good and ill, that technology can connect unconnected people, right? They have found each other. The problem when it comes to self-reflection and human flourishing is ultimately, even if, as some of our colleagues want, AI can substitute for a teacher's conversation with a student. I'm skeptical, but some think you can. Even if it could, at what point has that student learned to observe, respond to, assess the other, the one they're interacting with, if it's a machine? So I'm with you, Emily. And there is no substitute for sitting down with a student and having lunch or an hour in your office. That's the only way that it will work. And I don't think a machine can do that. Though, I have a friend in, I think he's in mechanical engineering. He's been talking to me about a different kind of robot. So we'll talk to George and see what he has to say.
Adam, you look like you want to
Yeah, I was going to kind of say, so I think I have a similar strategy, it sounds like you have, Emily, that I guess the way I approach my class is that like everyone has the same sort of opportunity to kind of gain sort of like the same sort of level of knowledge. But I often have like extra kind of like enrichment sort of exercises, right? Because I kind of have, for some I know they will not engage with the material in the way I might like them to, right? But I hope like I want to at least kind of hit. The way I think of it is I think there's a Harvard class like physics for presidents. So I think of my class as biology for presidents. That, I hope I'm like, at least if you're not going to be a biologist or a scientist, you're at least getting kind of like certain bullet points, like, like how a vaccine works and, like how gene editing works and maybe what are some of the social implications of these things, right? So I guess I kind of layer it that way. And like the higher level stuff is maybe, like I want students to be like challenging the status quo. Actually, I had a comment on Chris's last comment because I actually, about humility. My first semester teaching at MIT, I taught cell biology with Harvey Lodish, who wrote the cell biology textbook. And I had a student evaluation that said, Professor Martin, the students would respect you more if you pretended to know everything. It wasn't quite that. They said, we respect Harvey because he pretends to know everything. You should pretend to know everything. And so I like to kind of, that's when I started incorporating test questions that would sort of present data that argued against the models that were in the book. So,
Get them to think.
yeah, exactly. I want them to think. I want them to challenge kind of like what we think is kind of the frontier of the field. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I just put a vote in for just giving students the opportunity or forcing them to sort of actually think about why the heck they're in your class and what they really want to get out of it rather than I have to check off a box, right? And so some students have thought about that deeply and some students really haven't. They're on the conveyor belt and they're just going through. So that opportunity to open that up and have them think about it, hopefully deeply, is a wonderful thing to introduce them to and hopefully sets them up for their future. We have 1 minute left.
Wow.
A little more. There is a question. I see.
So I can give another example. So I've been at MIT off and on for 22 years, and my older child is an alum. He's not a computer scientist, majored in 14, minored in 9, but he's doing well, thank God. So before coming here, in 2016, I was the founding Dean of Engineering of BML Munjal University in India, a startup university launched in 2014. And one of the things that I picked up from MIT very strongly was the hands-on, experiential, learn by doing. So we created a class called Joy of Engineering. First year, first semester, students from 4 different majors came together. The ABET equivalent said, call it principles, concepts, fundamentals, and we said, you destroyed the joy right away. Right? So I think the point is that you can create the same ethos in different settings, but you have to know the context and the setting. I don't know if that answers your question partly. But.
I'll just briefly, I'm going to dodge your question because I think it's actually, but I'll maybe clarify the stakes of the question and connect it to Emily's comments earlier in the previous one. That I think that a buzzword that you will start to hear ever more about, if you haven't already, is personalized learning, right? And that is sort of the challenge of the future and how to do that at scale, right? On the one hand, the concept of personalized learning is basically as old as like Maria Montessori, right? So like this goes way back, right? But doing it in the current, with the technological tools that we have now, is both the challenge and the opportunity, because the challenge is to do it in a way that empowers students to go in more equitable directions, and so that personalized doesn't just empower or channel students into choosing the most career optimizing outcome for them. And just to clarify, we have often sort of pointed in this panel to those kinds of incentive structures that our MIT students are choosing right now, and we should not blame them for it. Right? We have designed a world, right? We've designed a world in which, they feel enormous pressure to maximize their career outcomes at the end. That's our fault, not theirs, right? But I think to answer also part of what Emily was asking about, I think it's a chicken and egg question of the extent to which you empower students to identify their goals, name them, and sort of meet them, without turning the university into a consumerist marketplace in which the student is the consumer meant to be pleased, but at the same time sort of making space for the curriculum, right, for the space of the faculty, right, who know content, who know how to learn, who might actually sort of structure the kind of goal seeking that the students do. So if we're at moments in which they don't, in fact, actually, because they're 19, don't in fact know like what their goals actually are. So the answer is I don't know.
There are campuses that are different. There are many campuses that are different. This is hard to answer without insulting a lot of people. If if the social sciences, humanities, and sciences were not viewed as in service to instrumental problem solving, you'd have a first step. There used to be a curriculum that required every student, I'm not sure it was this way at MIT, but in the previous century when I went to school, everybody had to study music and art and philosophy and literature and science and social science, and then they got to choose what kind of study. You didn't declare before or even in your first year. You were required to explore and then say, what do you like? There's an alternative.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you all. Thank the panelists. Wonderful conversation. Wonderful thoughts. I encourage everyone, especially the panelists, except not Adam, to submit a TFWAP proposal for how to improve the undergraduate education.
I'll read them. Yeah.
And deadline's February 3rd, but there's still time. And thank you all again. I appreciate it.
I wanted to thank Janet for being a terrific moderator.